A lone polar bear wandered far from its Arctic home and stunned residents by entering a small town. Confused and hungry, the massive animal searched streets and yards for food amid human settlement. Officials rushed to respond, carefully balancing public safety with protecting the endangered bear. The community watched in awe and fear as the bear's unusual journey captured global attention fast. This video explores how climate change and habitat loss push wildlife closer to human habitats today. You will learn the full story behind the bear's trek and the efforts to guide it safely back north. Experts weighed in on the risks posed by such encounters and what they mean for future wildlife. The event sparked debates about coexistence, conservation, and urgent climate action worldwide now. Stay tuned to discover how nature's struggles reflect broader environmental challenges all over. Make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true stories revealing nature's complex balance. 1. The unexpected visitor arrives. A lone polar bear wandered into a small Arctic town, surprising residents with its unusual presence. The town, typically isolated and quiet, was unprepared for such a large predator roaming freely. Residents first spotted the bear near the edge of the settlement, moving cautiously but steadily. Curiosity and concern spread quickly as word of the polar bear's arrival circulated throughout the town. Local authorities were alerted to monitor the situation and ensure the safety of both humans and bear. The polar bear appeared thin and possibly displaced from its natural sea ice hunting grounds. Experts suggested changes in sea ice conditions could have forced the bear to travel inland. The bear's behavior seemed calm, showing signs of exhaustion rather than aggression toward people. Community members debated how best to respond to the unprecedented situation with caution. The event highlighted broader environmental issues affecting polar bear habitats and survival. The arrival drew media attention, bringing global focus to the challenges faced by Arctic wildlife. Wildlife officers prepared relocation plans to guide the bear safely back to a more suitable environment. For days, the bear's journey through town became a reminder of the urgent need for climate action. 2. Environmental factors behind the bear's journey. Climate change and melting sea ice have increasingly forced polar bears to venture closer to human areas. Shrinking ice reduces access to seals, the polar bear's primary prey, leading to extended foraging trips. Unusual weather patterns contributed to unstable sea ice, causing the bear to seek food elsewhere. Rising temperatures in the Arctic have disrupted traditional hunting and migration behaviors. Scientists track these movements as indicators of the rapid environmental changes occurring in the region. Loss of habitat forces bears into unfamiliar terrain, increasing the risk of human-wildlife conflicts. The bear's journey inland reflects the urgent need for climate action to preserve Arctic ecosystems. Changing ice conditions also impact breeding cycles and cub survival rates among polar bears. Research shows increased sightings of bears near communities, raising concerns about safety. Understanding environmental drivers is critical for developing effective conservation strategies. 3. Community reactions and concerns. The town's residents reacted with a mix of awe, fear, and responsibility toward the visiting polar bear. Some viewed the bear as a symbol of the changing Arctic environment and wildlife struggles. Others expressed worry about potential attacks on people or domestic animals, especially children. Local schools temporarily closed as a precaution, limiting outdoor activities and gatherings. Authorities issued guidelines advising residents to stay indoors and avoid direct contact with the bear. Community meetings were held to discuss safety measures and share information about polar bears. Residents were urged to secure food sources and trash to avoid attracting the animal further. Volunteers helped place barriers and signage warning of the bear's presence in residential areas. Emotional responses included sadness for the bear's plight and frustration over environmental loss. The event fostered a sense of solidarity and collective responsibility toward coexistence challenges. 4. Wildlife management strategies deployed. Wildlife officers and conservation experts quickly mobilized to manage the situation safely and humanely. Tranquilizer teams were prepared to sedate the bear if it posed immediate danger to humans or itself. Non-lethal deterrents such as noisemakers and flares were used to encourage the bear to move away. Officers monitored the bear's movements via tracking devices and direct observation. Plans included temporary relocation to a remote area closer to its natural habitat once sedation was safe. Coordination with local authorities ensured smooth operation and minimized community disruption. Safety protocols prioritized minimizing stress and harm to the bear while protecting residents. Rescue teams trained in polar bear behavior worked to anticipate and respond to changing situations. Authorities also collaborated with scientists to gather data and inform future response plans. The strategies aim to balance wildlife conservation goals with human safety imperatives. 5. Impact on local wildlife and ecosystem. The bear's unusual presence affected other local wildlife species, causing shifts in behavior and habitat use. Prey species like Arctic hares and birds exhibited increased caution and avoidance of certain areas. Scavengers adapted to new food sources left by the polar bear's movements and feeding attempts. The intrusion highlighted interspecies competition intensified by environmental pressures. Ecologists studied these interactions to understand broader ecosystem impacts of displaced predators. Changes in predator-prey dynamics could ripple through the fragile Arctic food web with lasting effects. Displacement of polar bears disrupts traditional ecological roles and balance within the region. Observations indicated increased stress levels in some species, potentially affecting reproduction rates. The event emphasized the interconnectedness of climate change effects across multiple species. Ecosystem monitoring continues to assess long-term consequences of such wildlife disturbances. 6. Media attention and global awareness. The story of the polar bear wandering into town attracted extensive media coverage worldwide. Photographs and videos showing the bear amidst human settlements sparked widespread discussion. News outlets used the event to highlight the urgent realities of climate change and Arctic threats. Social media campaigns amplified the narrative, encouraging environmental advocacy and donations. Documentaries featuring the incident educated audiences about polar bears' vulnerability. Experts appeared in interviews explaining the broader context behind the bear's unusual journey. Media coverage raised awareness among policymakers and prompted calls for stronger climate action. Public interest translated into increased funding for Arctic conservation projects and research. The bear's story became emblematic of the challenges facing wildlife adapting to rapid environmental change. Responsible reporting helped balance public concern with scientific facts to avoid misinformation. 7. Challenges faced by rescue teams. Rescue operations face logistical difficulties due to extreme Arctic weather and terrain conditions. Cold temperatures and strong winds limited the time teams could safely spend in the field. Remote location and lack of infrastructure complicated transportation of personnel and equipment. Polar bear behavior required cautious approaches to avoid provoking aggression or stress. Sedation posed risks due to the bear's fragile condition and sensitivity to drugs in cold climates. Coordinating with local communities added layers of communication and safety considerations. Rapid changes in weather could hinder tracking and movement of the bear during rescue attempts. Ensuring the bear's welfare during capture and relocation demanded specialized veterinary expertise. Rescue teams relied on technology such as GPS collars and drones to minimize physical risks. Despite challenges, persistence and careful planning enabled successful management of the incident. 8. Cultural significance of polar bears. Polar bears hold iconic status in Arctic indigenous cultures as symbols of strength and survival. Stories and legends often feature polar bears as spiritual beings and guardians of the natural world. The bear's visit prompted reflections on traditional relationships between people and wildlife. Cultural values emphasize respect, coexistence, and stewardship of Arctic species and environments. Community elders shared knowledge about living harmoniously with polar bears and respecting their space. Artistic expressions, including carvings and paintings, celebrate the polar bear's majesty and importance. Cultural events highlighted the bear's role in sustaining indigenous identity and connection to nature. This incident reinforced the need to integrate cultural perspectives into conservation efforts. Engaging indigenous voices fostered greater understanding and cooperation during the rescue. The polar bear's story became a symbol of cultural resilience amid changing environmental realities. 9. Scientific insights gained. Researchers used the incident to study polar bear behavior in response to habitat loss and displacement. Tracking data revealed movement patterns and habitat preferences in proximity to human settlements. Health assessments provided insights into the physical impacts of environmental stressors on the bear. Scientists gathered valuable information on how climate change affects polar bear migration routes. The event prompted new hypotheses about adaptive behaviors in polar bears facing shrinking sea ice. Genetic sampling helped understand population connectivity and resilience amid environmental changes. Data contributed to refining predictive models for future polar bear distribution under climate scenarios. Collaborative studies integrated indigenous knowledge with scientific findings to enrich understanding. Findings supported development of improved management strategies for human-bear interactions. Ongoing research is vital to inform conservation policies and mitigate risks to polar bear populations. 10. Preparing the town for future encounters. Following the incident, the town developed comprehensive plans to manage future wildlife visits. Community education focused on safe behavior, reporting protocols, and wildlife deterrence methods. Infrastructure improvements included secure waste disposal to reduce attractants for bears. Emergency response teams received additional training specific to polar bear encounters and safety. Monitoring systems were installed to detect wildlife movements near populated areas in real time. Collaboration with conservation organizations enhanced preparedness and resource sharing. Local policies were updated to integrate wildlife considerations into urban planning and development. Public outreach campaigns encouraged coexistence while prioritizing safety for all parties involved. Youth programs promoted awareness and respect for Arctic wildlife among the next generation. The town's proactive measures aimed to build resilience and minimize risks in a changing environment. 11. Impact on local economy and tourism. The polar bear's unexpected visit affected the local economy in multiple ways, both positive and negative. Tourists were drawn by the rare event, boosting demand for accommodation, guides, and local shops. Conversely, some visitors canceled trips fearing safety risks associated with the bear's presence nearby. Local businesses adapted by offering guided wildlife viewing tours emphasizing safety and education. Merchandise sales featuring the polar bear event increased, supporting artisans and retailers. Authorities issued advisories balancing promotion of tourism with caution to prevent accidents. The incident highlighted the need for sustainable tourism that respects wildlife and community welfare. Investment in infrastructure to handle increased visitor numbers became a priority after the event. Training local guides in wildlife behavior improved visitor experiences and enhanced safety protocols. Economic diversification was encouraged to reduce dependency on unpredictable wildlife-related tourism. Community engagement in tourism planning ensured benefits were shared fairly among residents. Negative economic impacts included increased costs for emergency services and damage repairs. Insurance claims rose due to property damage related to the bear's movements through town. Long-term tourism strategies incorporated lessons learned about managing human-wildlife encounters. Marketing campaigns used the bear story to raise awareness about Arctic conservation challenges. Collaboration between tourism boards and conservationists promoted responsible travel practices. The event underscored tourism's role as a double-edged sword impacting both economy and environment. Local entrepreneurs leveraged media attention to develop new products and cultural experiences. Balancing economic growth with wildlife protection remains a central challenge for Arctic communities. The polar bear's visit became a catalyst for thoughtful dialogue on sustainable regional development. 12. Psychological effects on residents. The polar bear's presence caused mixed psychological reactions including fear, fascination, and stress. Children expressed curiosity but were also frightened, requiring parental reassurance and education. Adults worried about personal and family safety, especially during outdoor activities and travel. Some residents experienced heightened anxiety and sleeplessness due to uncertainty about the bear's behavior. Community meetings provided forums to address fears, share facts, and promote collective calmness. Mental health professionals offered support services for those experiencing trauma or stress. Positive feelings emerged from witnessing the bear, fostering a sense of wonder and connection to nature. Residents took pride in their community's response and resilience in managing a difficult situation. Art and storytelling became outlets for expressing complex emotions related to the incident. Educational programs helped reduce fear by increasing knowledge about polar bear habits and safety. Social cohesion strengthened as neighbors collaborated to protect one another and the environment. Long-term psychological impacts included increased environmental awareness and advocacy motivation. Youth engagement in conservation activities boosted morale and sense of empowerment. Public health campaigns integrated mental wellness into disaster preparedness planning. Community leaders emphasized the importance of balanced perspectives to maintain mental health. Resources were allocated to continue mental health support post-crisis and build future resilience. Residents learned coping strategies to manage uncertainty and adapt to changing environmental realities. The event sparked discussions on human-wildlife coexistence and the emotional dimensions involved. Understanding psychological effects informs better community support in future wildlife incidents. Emotional resilience became a key component of holistic disaster management approaches. 13. Educational outreach and awareness campaigns. Following the event, educational programs targeted schools and community groups to raise awareness. Curricula included lessons on polar bear ecology, climate change impacts, and safety protocols. Interactive workshops helped children and adults understand how to behave during wildlife encounters. Materials emphasize the importance of preserving Arctic habitats for future generations of wildlife. Community centers hosted talks by scientists, indigenous elders, and conservationists sharing knowledge. Media campaigns utilized videos, posters, and social media to spread accurate information widely. Outreach aimed to dispel myths and reduce fear by promoting scientific understanding of polar bears. Local artists created murals and exhibitions celebrating polar bears and environmental stewardship. Youth clubs organized nature walks and citizen science projects monitoring wildlife activity. Partnerships with universities and non-governmental organizations enhanced program resources and outreach effectiveness. Events incorporated traditional indigenous teachings highlighting cultural connections to wildlife. Public safety messages reinforced guidelines for securing food and minimizing attractants at home. School competitions encouraged creative projects on Arctic conservation and climate action. Volunteer training expanded community capacity for future wildlife emergencies and educational efforts. Educational efforts built long-term community engagement with conservation and disaster readiness. Programs integrated mental health components to address fears and build confidence in coexistence. Feedback mechanisms allowed ongoing improvement of outreach based on community needs. Multilingual materials ensured accessibility for diverse populations within the town. Evaluations showed increased knowledge and positive attitude shifts toward polar bears post-campaign. Education became a cornerstone for fostering harmonious relationships between people and wildlife. 14. Role of indigenous knowledge. Indigenous communities possess deep ecological knowledge critical for understanding polar bear behavior. Traditional observations of wildlife movements helped anticipate bear activity near settlements. Indigenous practices emphasize respect and non-confrontation with polar bears and other animals. Elders provided guidance on safe coexistence and culturally appropriate responses to wildlife presence. Incorporating indigenous wisdom improved trust and collaboration in managing the polar bear situation. Co-management approaches valued indigenous voices alongside scientific expertise for balanced solutions. Traditional stories conveyed lessons about the importance of protecting Arctic ecosystems. Seasonal hunting knowledge informed predictions of polar bear hunger and movement patterns. Indigenous community members served as liaisons, facilitating communication between authorities and locals. The blending of traditional and modern knowledge enhanced effectiveness of rescue and deterrent. Cultural sensitivity training for responders increased respect for indigenous values and customs. Involving indigenous youth in conservation promoted continuity of traditional ecological knowledge. Land stewardship principles guided sustainable development and habitat protection efforts. Recognition of indigenous rights and roles strengthened community resilience and empowerment. Collaborative research projects combined traditional methods with technology for improved monitoring. Indigenous-led initiatives focused on education and advocacy related to climate change impacts. Sharing indigenous knowledge globally raised awareness of Arctic environmental challenges. Respect for indigenous heritage supported reconciliation and inclusive environmental governance. The polar bear's story highlighted indigenous peoples' vital contributions to conservation success. Honoring indigenous knowledge remains essential for enduring protection of Arctic wildlife and culture. 15. Legal and policy responses. The incident prompted review and updates of local and national wildlife protection laws and policies. Legislation was strengthened to regulate human-wildlife interactions and emergency wildlife management. Policies clarified responsibilities of authorities in responding to displaced or dangerous animals. New protocols were established for rapid deployment of wildlife rescue teams during emergencies. Zoning laws incorporated wildlife corridors and buffer zones to reduce human-bear conflicts. Funding allocations were increased for wildlife conservation and disaster preparedness programs. Interagency coordination frameworks were formalized to improve communication and resource sharing. Public input was solicited in policy development to ensure community concerns were addressed. International treaties related to Arctic wildlife protection gained renewed emphasis and support. Legal frameworks aimed to balance ecological integrity with human safety and economic interests. Enforcement mechanisms were enhanced to deter illegal feeding or harassment of wildlife. Penalties for violations related to wildlife disturbance were revised to provide stronger deterrence. Policies promoted coexistence through education, habitat protection, and conflict mitigation. Emergency response plans included clear legal authority for wildlife capture and relocation. Legislative bodies prioritized climate change adaptation as a core component of environmental law. Cross-border cooperation was improved for species like polar bears that roam multiple jurisdictions. Transparency and accountability were embedded in wildlife management and disaster response policies. Periodic policy reviews were mandated to incorporate new scientific knowledge and community feedback. Legal responses recognize the need for flexible, adaptive frameworks in the face of changing conditions. Effective legislation supports sustainable coexistence and conservation of vulnerable Arctic species. 16. Long-term conservation goals. The polar bear incident reinforced the urgency of comprehensive conservation planning in the Arctic. Goals include protecting critical habitats from development and environmental degradation. Efforts focus on mitigating climate change impacts through emissions reductions and adaptation measures. Conservation strategies emphasize maintaining biodiversity and ecosystem services in Arctic landscapes. Collaborative initiatives involve governments, indigenous groups, scientists, and NGOs working together. Habitat restoration projects aim to enhance food availability and safe migration routes for polar bears. Monitoring programs track population health, reproduction rates, and threats over time. Research supports understanding polar bear genetic diversity and resilience to environmental stress. Public engagement campaigns foster widespread support and awareness for Arctic conservation needs. Funding mechanisms ensure sustained investment in long-term protection and management efforts. Policies promote sustainable resource use, balancing economic development and environmental health. Education and training build local capacity to participate actively in conservation initiatives. Climate adaptation planning integrates polar bear conservation with broader Arctic ecosystem management. International cooperation addresses transboundary challenges affecting polar bear populations. Technological advancements aid in non-invasive monitoring and conflict prevention techniques. Community-led conservation projects empower indigenous and local stakeholders. Regular assessments evaluate progress toward conservation targets and identify emerging risks. Adaptive management frameworks allow flexible responses to changing environmental conditions. The incident galvanized renewed commitment to preserving polar bears as keystone Arctic species. Achieving these goals is essential to ensure the survival of polar bears amid global environmental change. 17. Innovations in human-wildlife conflict mitigation. The polar bear's visit inspired new approaches to preventing and managing human-wildlife conflicts. Electric fencing and deterrent devices were tested to safely exclude bears from residential areas. Community alert systems were enhanced to provide real-time warnings of wildlife presence. Non-lethal repellents, such as scent markers and noise devices, reduced attractant behaviors. Mobile applications allowed residents to report sightings and receive safety advice instantly. Collaborations with technology firms led to development of automated monitoring and deterrence tools. Training programs equipped community members with skills to safely interact with wildlife. Innovative habitat design incorporated natural barriers to minimize bear access to towns. Research into bear psychology informed behavior-based mitigation strategies for conflict reduction. Multi-stakeholder partnerships funded pilot projects testing new technologies and methods. Education campaigns promoted practices to reduce human attractants such as unsecured food. Early detection and rapid response systems minimized prolonged interactions between bears and humans. Monitoring systems integrated artificial intelligence to predict bear movements and risk zones. Community feedback guided refinement and acceptance of mitigation innovations. Successes were shared with other Arctic and subarctic communities facing similar challenges. Ongoing innovation supports coexistence in rapidly changing environmental and social contexts. Technological tools complemented traditional knowledge to enhance human safety, and wildlife protection innovations contributed to reducing injury risks and property damage associated with wildlife visits. Adaptive conflict mitigation strategies remain vital as polar bears face increasing habitat pressures. Continuous evaluation ensures effectiveness and sustainability of human-wildlife conflict solutions. 18. Lessons for global climate change impact. The polar bear's journey into town serves as a powerful reminder of climate change's far-reaching effects. It exemplifies how warming temperatures disrupt species habitats and force behavioral adaptations. The incident highlights the interconnectedness of human and wildlife well-being in a changing world. Climate change threatens biodiversity, ecosystem services, and cultural traditions dependent on nature. Global mitigation efforts must prioritize reducing greenhouse gas emissions to slow Arctic warming. Adaptation strategies are essential to prepare communities and ecosystems for unavoidable changes. The event underscores the urgency of integrating conservation with climate resilience planning. Cross-disciplinary collaboration enhances understanding and response capabilities for climate impacts. Public awareness raised by such events can drive stronger political will and environmental action. Lessons learned inform policymaking addressing climate risks to vulnerable species and human settlements. The polar bear's story motivates individuals and organizations to advocate for sustainable living. Scientific research benefits from monitoring climate-related wildlife responses to inform solutions. International cooperation is key to addressing climate change impacts transcending national borders. Investing in green technologies supports economic transition while protecting natural habitats. Education and communication empower societies to make informed decisions amid climate uncertainty. Preserving Arctic ecosystems contributes to global climate regulation and biodiversity conservation. The event illustrates consequences of delayed climate action and need for immediate intervention. Communities worldwide can learn from Arctic experiences to build adaptive capacity and resilience. Collective responsibility and proactive measures are essential for securing a sustainable future. The polar bear's journey becomes a symbol of both vulnerability and hope in the climate crisis. 19. Community stories and personal accounts. Residents shared personal experiences that revealed the human dimension of the polar bear visit. Families recounted their initial fear followed by relief as authorities managed the situation safely. Children described watching the bear from a distance and learning about its place in nature. Local hunters spoke of traditional respect for polar bears and the significance of coexistence. Volunteers recalled moments of camaraderie while helping with community safety measures. Elders expressed concern for future generations and the importance of preserving cultural ties. Business owners narrated economic challenges and opportunities arising from increased attention. Teachers highlighted how the event became a teaching moment for environmental responsibility. Healthcare workers discussed addressing stress and anxiety caused by the unusual encounter. Artists conveyed the emotional impact through paintings, music, and storytelling projects. Community leaders emphasized unity and resilience in facing unprecedented challenges together. Residents' narratives contributed to oral histories documenting the event for future reference. Personal stories helped humanize the broader environmental issues connected to the polar bear. Shared experiences strengthened social bonds and collective commitment to conservation goals. Community forums provided safe spaces for expressing fears, hopes, and aspirations post-crisis. Local media collected testimonials to ensure diverse voices were represented accurately and respectfully. These accounts highlighted the complexity of emotions evoked by living alongside changing wildlife. Documenting stories preserved cultural memory and informed disaster preparedness planning. The event fostered empathy and a deeper connection between people and their environment. Personal narratives remain a vital component of community healing and future resilience building. 20. Vision for a harmonious future. The polar bear's visit inspired a vision of peaceful coexistence between humans and Arctic wildlife. Sustainable development principles guide town planning to protect habitats and minimize conflict risks. Innovative conservation policies prioritize both species survival and community well-being. Education fosters respect and understanding, building a culture of coexistence across generations. Collaboration among scientists, indigenous peoples, and residents strengthens shared stewardship. Climate action commitments address root causes threatening polar bears and their ecosystems. Technological advances enhance monitoring and management without disrupting natural behaviors. Community empowerment ensures local voices guide conservation and disaster response efforts. Protected corridors and refuges support wildlife movement and reduce encounters in populated areas. Adaptive management embraces change and integrates traditional and scientific knowledge. Resilient infrastructure balances human needs with environmental conservation goals. Cultural celebrations honor polar bears as integral to regional identity and heritage. Global partnerships support funding and knowledge exchange for Arctic conservation. Youth engagement guarantees continuity of conservation efforts and environmental leadership. Mental health and social cohesion remain priorities in building sustainable communities. Preparedness plans incorporate flexible strategies for evolving climate and ecological conditions. Public awareness campaigns sustain momentum for responsible behavior and policy support. Innovative solutions inspire hope for addressing complex environmental challenges collectively. The vision embodies harmony, respect, and shared responsibility for a thriving Arctic future. The polar bear's journey becomes a lasting symbol of resilience, adaptation, and coexistence. This story reminds us that human actions deeply affect the natural world and its delicate systems. Like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories about animals facing the changing planet. Share your thoughts on wildlife encounters and conservation efforts in the comments below today. Thanks for watching and supporting our mission to share nature's most incredible true stories.